I never expected that one unforeseen moment would shatter the illusion of our life together. I came home early on a rainy Friday evening, only to see, on a grainy security feed, my wife entering a hotel lobby hand in hand with a stranger, a man whose smile and confident stride screamed betrayal. In that instant, every cherished promise and quiet hope we'd built together dissolved into bitter, jagged shards. My heart pounded, my breath caught in my throat, and I felt the very foundation of my marriage crumble into a pile of devastating lies. I knew then that nothing would ever be the same. For years, I had believed our marriage was a sanctuary, a safe, comforting haven where trust and love reigned supreme. I took pride in the life we had built, cozy evenings at home, shared laughter over dinner, and secret dreams of a future filled with promise. I trusted her completely. I dismissed the occasional hushed phone calls and the fleeting, mysterious glances as mere quirks in an otherwise happy routine. But that evening, everything changed. It began like any other day. I had been on a late meeting and, by some stroke of luck, returned home earlier than expected. The rain was falling steadily, drenching the quiet suburban streets, and I arrived at our modest home with a lightness in my step, anticipating a warm welcome. Instead, I found the door unlocked and the living room unnervingly empty. The usual welcoming hum of our home was absent. Instead, an eerie silence reigned. A sinking feeling in my gut told me that something was terribly wrong. As I walked through the hallway, my eyes caught a glimpse of a folder tucked away on our entryway table, something I had never seen before. It looked out of place amid the everyday clutter, its contents concealed under a plain cover. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and a sudden chill of dread, I picked it up and slid my fingers under the flap. Inside, there were printed emails, travel itineraries, and even hotel reservation details that I had never been privy to. The details pointed unmistakably to a weekend trip, one that my wife had not mentioned, one that was scheduled for the very day I was home. My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. The itinerary confirmed what I had feared. She was at a hotel, spending time with someone else. With every line I read, the world around me darkened. Memories of our shared laughter and whispered promises now clashed violently with this cruel evidence. I felt as though I were watching my life disintegrate in real time, a slow, relentless collapse of every trust and every hope I had ever harbored. I sank into the sofa, my mind racing with questions that I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. How long had this been going on? Had I been so naive? I recalled subtle signs I had once brushed off, her late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, the secretive glances at her phone, and even a distant air in her smile that I had attributed to stress. Now, each of those moments resonated with a painful clarity that cut deeper than any words could. In that heavy silence, my eyes wandered to our anniversary photo on the mantel, a snapshot of us, laughing, arms entwined, with a promise of forever captured in a single, perfect moment. How could that picture be so far removed from the bitter reality now laid bare before me? The image seemed to mock me, a relic of a time when love was simple and trust was unbreakable. I knew I couldn't remain frozen in disbelief. With shaking hands, I gathered every piece of evidence, the printed itineraries, the emails, even a series of text messages I found hidden in her drawer. Each scrap was a testament to a secret life, a life where I was not included, where my presence had been erased from the narrative she had so carefully constructed. I placed everything in a folder, sealing it shut as if locking away a part of my past I could no longer bear. The flood of betrayal overwhelmed me. My chest felt constricted, and a dull ache radiated through my entire body. I felt both numb and acutely aware, as if each second stretched on indefinitely. I began to write feverishly in my journal, a desperate, raw outpouring of every thought and emotion that surged through me. I poured out the shock, the disbelief, and the gut-wrenching sorrow of realizing that the foundation of my marriage was built on lies. Every word was a confession of pain, a record of a love I had thought was unassailable now tarnished by deceit. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in the darkness, the soft patter of rain on the window a melancholic soundtrack to my inner torment. I kept replaying the images in my mind, the sight of her entering that hotel, her hand in the hand of another man, the way her eyes briefly met mine as if apologizing for the betrayal before she turned away. Each memory was a dagger, twisting in my chest, leaving me wondering how the woman I loved could have orchestrated such a lie. As the hours slowly passed, a simmering anger began to take hold, a burning need for answers and accountability. I knew that I couldn't allow this revelation to remain hidden, to continue to gnaw at my soul in silence. The truth, as devastating as it was, had to be confronted. I resolved that when the morning came, I would face her with every piece of evidence I had gathered. I would demand an explanation for the betrayal that had ripped our lives apart. I would no longer allow myself to be diminished by lies. Before the break of dawn, as the darkness slowly gave way to the soft light of a new day, I took one final, steadying breath. I closed my journal, my heart heavy but resolute, and prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. The road ahead promised to be painful, filled with raw, unfiltered truths and difficult questions that might forever alter the course of my life. Yet, in that silent, fragile moment, I made a vow to myself: I would confront this betrayal head-on. I would reclaim my dignity, my self-worth, and the future that was rightfully mine. No matter how devastating the fallout, I would no longer live in the shadow of deceit. The journey of uncovering the truth had begun, and I was ready to face whatever came next. In the chaos that followed the public exposé, I found myself thrust into a vortex of raw emotion, isolation, and a desperate need for answers. The once festive atmosphere of our anniversary celebration, filled with laughter, toasts, and shared memories, had crumbled into a scene of stunned silence and whispered disbelief. As guests murmured among themselves and eyes shifted nervously in my direction, I felt the weight of every betrayed promise and every quiet secret crashing down around me. 4 hours after I revealed the damning evidence on my phone, I wandered aimlessly through our now alien home. Every room held a painful reminder of the life I thought we had built together. The photographs on the walls, the carefully arranged floral centerpieces, even the soft lighting that used to evoke warmth and intimacy now mocked me with its artificial glow. I could still hear the distant murmur of our guests' shocked voices, the rustle of garments as people tried to escape the painful scene. The betrayal wasn't just a private pain, it had become a public spectacle, and I felt utterly exposed, raw, and alone. In the immediate aftermath, my mind was a battlefield. I replayed the moment of confrontation over and over, each iteration slicing deeper into my heart. I remembered the exact expression on my wife's face when I revealed the secret texts and photos. I recalled the way her eyes darted around, desperate to find an escape from the inevitable truth. The memory of the man beside her, the one whose presence had confirmed every hidden suspicion, seared itself into my consciousness. Every detail, every whispered excuse from that terrible conversation, was a reminder that the foundation of trust one had built with her was irreparably cracked. That night, I couldn't bring myself to join the other guests who drifted away in silent shock. Instead, I locked myself in our study, where the evidence lay scattered on the coffee table like a damning mosaic of our shared past. I sat in the dim light, feeling a storm of conflicting emotions. At times, anger surged through me with the ferocity of a wildfire, while at others, an overwhelming numbness threatened to swallow me whole. I questioned every memory, every moment I had trusted her, every time I had dismissed those subtle red flags, and the realization that I had been living a lie was both soul-crushing and strangely clarifying. I began to write feverishly in my journal, determined to capture every nuance of my pain and confusion. I wrote about the shock of discovering the truth, the moment my heart sank as I saw the evidence, and the overwhelming betrayal that had left me questioning my entire life. Each line was a catharsis, a raw, unfiltered admission of the hurt that now defined my existence. I scribbled, "How could she? How could I have been so blind?" over and over, as if repeating the words could somehow lessen the sting. But as the night deepened, the act of writing slowly transformed from a desperate release into a quiet promise. I realized that I couldn't let this betrayal consume me entirely. The painful truth, as devastating as it was, could also be the catalyst for a rebirth, a chance to reclaim my dignity and redefine my future. The next morning, I awoke before dawn, the room still heavy with the echoes of that horrid night. I sat by the window, watching as the first light crept in, and a fragile determination began to replace the initial shock. I made a decision: I would no longer allow my life to be dictated by the lies and deceptions of the past. I needed to understand every facet of this betrayal, to confront the woman I once loved and demand accountability, not for revenge, but for my own clarity and healing. I spent the following day meticulously organizing the evidence. Every text message, every photo, every timestamp was carefully saved and documented. I built a timeline of events in my head, a narrative that illustrated a slow, deliberate drift away from honesty. Each piece of evidence was a painful reminder of the trust one had lost, but also a tool for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. I printed out the most damning documents and placed them in a folder, sealing them as if I were locking away a chapter of my life that I needed to end. That evening, I steeled myself for the conversation that would unravel our marriage completely. I rehearsed my words in front of a mirror, my eyes reflecting a mixture of anguish and a newly forged resolve. "I need to know when it started," I practiced, "and why you chose to hide it from me." Every question was an invitation for truth, a plea for an explanation that, if given, might allow me to begin the slow process of healing. But deep inside, I already knew that no matter what she said, the life we had shared was now irreparably tainted by deceit. As dusk settled, the house felt oppressively quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of our party just hours before. I waited in the living room, the folder of evidence lying like a silent judge on the coffee table. Every minute stretched painfully long as I recalled the laughter that had once filled these rooms and the intimacy we had once taken for granted. Now, those memories were like ghostly apparitions, reminders of a happiness that had been so callously dismantled. Finally, my wife returned home. Her face was ashen, her eyes avoiding mine as if they feared the truth I now held. I stood up slowly, each step toward her filled with a tumult of emotions, grief, anger, and a bitter determination to reclaim what was left of my dignity. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but laden with raw, painful emotion. In that moment, the air between us crackled with tension and unspoken accusations. I began by laying out the evidence, holding up my phone so that she could see the incriminating texts and photos, each one a silent testament to her betrayal. I asked her, voice trembling with both rage and sorrow, "How long have you been lying to me? When did this all begin?" Her eyes, filled with tears and regret, flickered with a mix of shame and fear as she struggled to form a response. The conversation that followed was a painful, halting exchange, a desperate scramble of half-truths, stuttered apologies, and the unmistakable sound of a trust broken beyond repair. Throughout that harrowing confrontation, I felt the crushing weight of every shared memory turn into shards of betrayal. I demanded answers, not for the sake of punishment, but to reclaim my truth. I wanted to know if the love we had once nurtured was nothing more than a facade, if the promises of loyalty had been hollow all along. With every word she uttered, I felt a piece of the man I once was crumble. My identity, so carefully constructed on the foundation of our shared life, now seemed utterly in ruins. The room, once a testament to our union, now echoed with the painful silence of shattered trust. I could see the hurt in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by the enormity of my own despair. I realized then that our marriage had been a slow erosion, a gradual decay of truth that had gone unnoticed until it was too late. The revelation that she had betrayed me so thoroughly, not only with another man but in the very sanctity of our home, was a wound too deep to heal with mere words. As the confrontation drew to a close, I felt an overwhelming mix of exhaustion and a grim resolve. I told her that the evidence was irrefutable, that the truth would not be hidden any longer, and that I could no longer trust the woman I had once believed was my partner. With a heavy heart and a voice barely above a whisper, I declared, "I can't live like this anymore. I need to reclaim my life." The words hung in the air, a final, shattering admission that our marriage was irretrievably broken. After she left the room, I sank into a chair, feeling the crushing emptiness of betrayal and loss. Yet amid that desolation, I began to sense a flicker of something else, a stirring of strength that promised a future free from deception. I knew that the road ahead would be grueling, the legal battles, the emotional healing, and the painstaking process of rebuilding my self-worth. But I also knew that this painful confrontation was the first step toward a new beginning. That night, as I sat in the solitude of our darkened living room, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The images of that evening, the shocked faces of our guests, the silent despair in my wife's eyes, and the bitter reality of every piece of evidence, became etched in my memory. Yet, within that tapestry of pain, I found a glimmer of resolve. I began writing in my journal, detailing every thought and emotion, not as a cry of defeat but as a manifesto of rebirth. I vowed that I would no longer be defined by the betrayal that had torn apart our shared dreams. I would use this as the fuel to rebuild my identity, to reclaim my dignity, and to forge a future based solely on honesty and self-respect. As I closed my journal and turned off the lights, I felt an unspoken promise echo through the quiet of the night, a promise that despite the heartache and the endless questions, I would emerge from this crucible stronger than before. I lay awake, listening to the steady patter of rain, knowing that every drop was a reminder of the tears I had shed and the battles I had fought. I understood that the journey toward healing was just beginning, that I would have to confront the legal, emotional, and personal fallout in the days ahead. But in that long, painful moment of reflection, I also recognized a vital truth: I was not broken beyond repair. I was a man reborn from the ashes of betrayal, ready to reclaim my truth and rebuild my life, one resolute, determined step at a time. I awoke the next morning with a mix of sorrow, relief, and a fierce determination pulsing through me. The echoes of that night, the shock of revealing her betrayal to an audience, the hollow silence that followed, and the final, trembling words I had uttered, had left me raw and exposed, yet strangely liberated. The public exposé had torn apart the carefully built image of our life, but it had also forced me to confront the truth and, in doing so, light a spark for something entirely new. My heart was heavy with the remnants of shattered trust, yet it also beat with the promise of a future that I could now shape on my own terms. In the hours after the confrontation, I wandered the empty halls of our home like a man in a daze. Every piece of furniture, every familiar photograph on the walls, now seemed to echo with memories of the love I once believed in, a love that had been reduced to whispered lies and public humiliation. The faces of our friends, their eyes wide with disbelief, still lingered in my mind. I felt an overwhelming need to understand, to process, and eventually, to reclaim the dignity that had been so callously stripped away. That day marked the beginning of my long journey toward healing and transformation. I knew that I could not let the betrayal dictate the rest of my life. With a trembling resolve, I made the decision to file for divorce. The legal process was a bitter necessity, one that forced me to dismantle a shared history that, until that moment, had felt unbreakable. I met with my lawyer in a stark, quiet conference room where every document I signed felt like a small liberation, a step away from the web of deceit that had ensnared me. Each signature was an act of reclaiming my identity, a promise that I would no longer be defined by the lies that had betrayed me. But the legal paperwork was only one part of the reckoning. Emotionally, I had to face a torrent of feelings that threatened to overwhelm me. I began therapy with Dr. Marisol Vega, a compassionate counselor who guided me through the labyrinth of heartbreak and helped me see that while the pain of betrayal might never vanish completely, it could be transformed into the building blocks of a stronger self. "Your wounds, as deep as they are not marks of defeat," she told me during one session, "but the evidence of your incredible resilience. Use them to build a new life, a life where you are the sole author of your destiny." Her words resonated deeply, and slowly, I started to believe that there was a future beyond this devastation. I spent many long evenings writing in my journal, each entry a raw and unfiltered confession of my inner turmoil. I wrote about the loneliness of the night after the exposé, when I sat alone in the quiet of our living room and reread every painful detail. I detailed the flash of horror in my wife's eyes when confronted with the evidence, and the crushing realization that the trust one had built with her was nothing but a fragile illusion. I questioned my own judgments, wondering if I had missed the subtle signs that now seemed so glaringly obvious. But as I wrote, I also began to see patterns emerging in my pain, lessons that, although harsh, pointed toward a path of renewal. Every tear, every heartbreak, became a testament to the strength I was beginning to cultivate. In the weeks that followed, I resolved to reclaim every part of my life that had been overshadowed by the betrayal. I reconnected with old friends, people who had always seen me for who I was beyond the role of a husband, and discovered that their support was a lifeline in my dark hours. We met for long walks in the park, shared late-night conversations over coffee, and I even received messages from acquaintances who had been touched by my story. Their empathy, their shared experiences of betrayal and loss, reinforced a powerful truth: I was not alone in this struggle, and the journey toward healing was a path that countless others had walked before me. At work, I threw myself into my projects with a renewed intensity. The fire of my heartbreak became the fuel for creativity. I volunteered for challenging assignments and pitched innovative ideas, determined to show that I was more than the sum of my pain. Every accolade from a colleague, every nod of approval from a client, felt like a small victory, a reaffirmation that I was capable of rising above the deception and building a future of my own design. The professional successes gradually began to stitch together the tattered remnants of my self-esteem, giving me the courage to believe that I could reinvent my identity. One crisp autumn afternoon, I decided to take a solo trip, a journey meant to clear my mind and reconnect me with the part of myself that had been buried under the weight of betrayal. I traveled to a quiet coastal town where the relentless sound of crashing waves and the vast expanse of the horizon reminded me that life was boundless, and my future was not confined to the memories of a shattered marriage. Walking along the beach, I let the salt-tinged breeze wash over me, carrying away the remnants of despair. I sat on the weathered sand, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of orange and pink, and in that moment, I made a silent vow: no matter how deep the pain, I would not let it define my tomorrow. When I returned home, I began to take deliberate steps to rebuild. I opened a personal bank account and started saving, every dollar a symbol of my reclaimed independence. I enrolled in online courses to further my education, determined to expand my horizons and to build a career that was solely my own. I even began exploring creative ventures that had long lain dormant, such as writing poetry and painting abstract landscapes that captured the raw spectrum of my emotions. Every new skill I acquired, every small achievement, was a brick laid in the foundation of my new life, a life that I was now free to mold with my own hands. I also made the courageous decision to share my story with the world, though only on a private blog at first. I wrote openly about the betrayal, the public expose that had turned a joyous celebration into a scene of heart-wrenching drama, and the long, painful road toward reclaiming my identity. The response was overwhelming. Anonymous messages of support, shared experiences, and words of encouragement flowed in from readers who had endured similar betrayals. Their voices became a chorus of strength, a reminder that I was not alone in this struggle and that, together, we could rise from the ashes of deception. The legal process, while grueling, also marked a turning point. Every document I signed, every form I filled out, was a step toward severing the ties that had bound me to a life of false promises. I met with my lawyer regularly, and in those meetings, I began to see a future where my rights were respected and my voice was heard. I filed for divorce with a mixture of sorrow and relief, recognizing that the end of our marriage was not just a termination of a relationship, but the beginning of a rebirth, a chance to redefine what it meant to be true to myself. As the months passed, the raw intensity of that fateful confrontation began to give way to a steady rhythm of healing and rebuilding. I continued therapy, and slowly, the deep wounds of betrayal started to close, replaced by scars that I now viewed as symbols of my resilience. I learned that healing was not a linear process but a journey filled with setbacks and small triumphs. There were nights when the memories of that public expose would surge back, overwhelming me with pain, yet I now had the strength to face them head-on, to let the tears flow and then to rise again. I began to envision a future where I was not defined by the lies and betrayals of the past. I pictured a life where I could travel, pursue passions that had long been put on hold, and forge relationships founded on honesty and mutual respect. I set goals for my career, mapping out a plan to reach new heights and to ensure that my hard work was celebrated. Every small victory was a reminder that I was capable of more, that I was building a legacy not from the ruins of deception but from the strength of my own spirit. Now, as I stand on the threshold of this new dawn, I feel the promise of tomorrow in every heartbeat. The betrayal that once threatened to shatter my world has become the catalyst for my rebirth, a painful, transformative journey that has taught me the true value of self-worth and the unyielding power of the human spirit. I have reclaimed my identity, rebuilt my dreams, and redefined my future on my own terms. The road ahead may still be lined with challenges, but I now walk it with a clear, determined step and a heart fortified by the trials I have endured. In this final moment of reckoning, as I reflect on the long, arduous path that led me here, I realize that every tear shed, every bitter word spoken, has been part of my transformation. I have learned that true strength is not the absence of pain, but the courage to rise from it, to rebuild and to create a life that is authentically my own. I now stand not as a victim of betrayal, but as a man reborn, ready to face the future with resilience, wisdom, and an unshakable belief that my destiny is mine to shape. And so, with the first light of a new day breaking over the horizon, I step forward into the unknown. I embrace the possibility of a tomorrow filled with hope, growth, and the promise of a life where truth, honor, and self-respect guide every step. I am no longer defined by the betrayal that once tore me apart, I am defined by the strength that emerged from it. Every scar is a reminder of what I have overcome, and every sunrise is a new beginning, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, there is always a spark of light waiting to ignite a future of endless possibilities.